Today, we're tackling an important question. Do we really need to teach comprehension, or does it happen naturally once decoding is in place? If you're new here, my name is Anna Geiger. I'm the author of Reach All Readers and also creator of the Reach All Readers website, course, and podcast. And I'm here to help you understand and apply the science of reading. Today, I'm breaking down what comprehension is, how it fits within the science of reading, and why, despite what some people assume, comprehension instruction is absolutely essential. So what is comprehension? To answer that question, I want to first clear up a common misunderstanding about comprehension, the idea that it's simply another skill. You may be familiar with the Big Five. Those are the 5 key factors that the National Reading Panel back in 2000 identified as important when it comes to learning to read. So those are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Maybe you've seen this displayed as a 5 pillars graphic. It's true that these 5 elements should be present in any reading program, but this 5 pillars graphic leads to misunderstandings about what comprehension actually is. The graphic makes it look as if we can teach comprehension in the same way that we teach phonemic awareness and phonics. But that's not quite accurate. Think of it this way. If you learn to swim, you can swim in the pool, a lake, the shallow end of the ocean. But comprehension doesn't work like that. Comprehension isn't a single thing you can teach and then apply across all reading situations. It's far more complex than that. How well you comprehend depends on what you're reading and why you're reading it. Your background knowledge, your purpose for reading, the complexity of the text, all these things come into play. To understand what comprehension actually involves, it's helpful to think about Kinch's model, which shows us that comprehension involves 3 levels of text representation. The first level is the surface level, the exact wording and syntax of the text. The second level is the text space. This is where you understand the text and how the ideas relate to each other. You're making connections in the text and you're understanding what's explicitly stated. We want to go further than that though. We want to create a mental model, or in Kinch's model, a situation model. This is what you take away from the text when you're done reading. It's shaped by many things: your background knowledge, your experiences, even your emotions. The situation model goes beyond what's explicitly stated on the page. It's your mental representation. It's your takeaway. This complexity is exactly why Oak Hill, Kane, and Elbrow write, "Reading is a complex task which requires the orchestration of many different cognitive skills and abilities." As I wrote in my book, Reach All Readers, like it or not, comprehension is a complex beast. I've been asked many times, where does comprehension fit into the science of reading? Now, just as a reminder, the science of reading is simply a body of research about how we learn to read and how best to teach it. But one way to answer this question simply is to look at the simple view of reading. The simple view of reading is not trying to tell us that learning to read or that teaching reading is simple. What it does do is it breaks the complexities down into 2 main categories. So the simple view of reading proposed by Goff and Tumner back in 1986 tells us that word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. For successful comprehension to result, we need both word recognition and language comprehension. These components contribute differently to reading success depending on where students are in their level of development. For beginning readers, variation in ability is very closely tied to that word recognition because the texts they're reading are so simple. The language comprehension they need to comprehend these simple texts is something that's been there since they were young as they learn to talk. But as the texts they read get more complex, language comprehension contributes more to reading comprehension. Now, if you're thinking, I teach kindergarten, this isn't important for me, listen up. The teaching strategies I'll be discussing in future videos apply whether you're reading to students and they're listening or they're reading the text on their own. So let's review what we've covered so far. We've talked about why comprehension isn't a single ability. It's complex. It depends on what you're reading and why. We talked about Kinch's model, his 3 levels of text representation: the surface level, the text space, and the situation model, or the mental model, what you take away from the reading. And we've seen that according to the simple view of reading, both word recognition and language comprehension are important for reading comprehension to occur. So let's move on to the question I proposed at the beginning of this video. Do you actually need to teach comprehension, or will it follow naturally once you teach decoding? Here's the truth. Word recognition is necessary, but not sufficient for reading comprehension to occur. You absolutely can have students who read accurately and even fluently, but don't understand what they read. In fact, I'm guessing you've had a similar experience as an adult. This is the book I'm required to read for my PhD in literacy program. I'm currently taking statistics. And there have been weeks where I did the assigned reading and none of it made any sense to me at all. I could read the words, but I didn't have a mental model because I didn't understand how all the pieces fit together. Before I get into what we can do about this, let's talk about why written language is so much more complex than spoken language. There are quite a few reasons for this, and I'm going to summarize those shared by Oakhill, Kane, and Elbro in their book, Understanding and Teaching Reading Comprehension. First, you can't interact with the text the way that you can with a speaker. If you're talking with someone and you don't understand what they're saying, you can ask them to back up and explain it again, or in a different way. But with the text, what you've got is what you've got. Second, written language lacks the nuances of spoken language, things like pauses and emphasis. And those things help with comprehension. Without them, written text is tougher to comprehend. Third, written language contains more complex text structure than spoken language. Here's a sentence from my statistics book. If you want to construct confidence intervals around those parameters or compute significance tests relating to those parameters, then assumption of normality matters in small samples, but because of the central limit theorem, we don't really need to worry about this assumption in larger samples. That kind of complex text structure is much more challenging to process than how we speak. Next, when you're talking with someone face to face, you share the same context. But when you're reading a text, you don't share the same context as the writer. And finally, the final reason why written text is harder to comprehend than spoken language is that when we speak, we naturally revise as we go. Written language is more dense, so we may need to process it more slowly than when we listen to conversation. So, what does good comprehension actually involve? A lot of this happens unconsciously as you read, but let's break it down. You need to know the meanings of individual words. You need to understand sentence structure and syntax, the grammatical rules that determine how words are arranged. Text connectives matter too. Words like however, meanwhile, although. Have you ever stopped reading because it didn't quite make sense and gone back to read it and realized you missed a connective? Imagine you come across this sentence. Explicit vocabulary instruction is beneficial. Incidental word learning through wide reading contributes significantly to vocabulary growth. If you skip over that connective while at the beginning, the sentence doesn't quite make sense. When we go back and read it with the connective, then we understand the contrast being set up between the two approaches. As you read, you also need to compare what you're reading to what you already know. And when it's different from what you thought you knew, you may need to revise your knowledge. This was certainly my experience when I read Emily Hanford's article At a Loss for Words a number of years ago. Learning that 3Qing, which I held dear and was the foundation of my reading approach, was actually not beneficial and even harmful, rocked my world, and not in a good way. I had to read that article many times over many months before it finally sunk in. Another thing we need to do as we're reading is make inferences. We're filling in the gaps between what the author explicitly stated and what's not there. And finally, we need to monitor comprehension. If we don't understand, we need to back up and read it again. If you want to dive deeper into this content, you're invited to my workshop, Building Comprehension from the Ground Up. In that training, we'll bust common myths related to comprehension, examine what the science of reading truly says about comprehension, and equip you with practical tips and tools you can implement immediately. So let's go back to the question I posed at the beginning of this video. If word recognition is in place, does comprehension follow naturally? The answer is no. That's because comprehension is much more than a single skill we can teach and apply in every context. However, there are specific things we can do to improve comprehension, and we'll be looking at those things in future videos. If this video was helpful, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.